Okay. Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome. I know more people are coming into the room, but we are going to go ahead and get started. So thank you for attending this very important conversation concerning educational equality and equity. My name is Leah Owens. I serve as chair of the Newark NAACP Education Committee, and I am a member of the statewide coalition for education equity. The coalition, along with the Cornwall Center at Rutgers Newark, are bringing forth today's discussion on the New Jersey Superior Court decision. So we had a little typo on the flyer, so it wasn't a Supreme Court decision, but a Superior Court decision on school segregation. What does it mean? What should happen next? To open the discussion, allow me to trace some of the steps that have had us arrive here. In May 2018, on the 64th anniversary of the Brown v. Board of Education U.S. Supreme Court decision, a complaint was filed against the state of New Jersey, claiming it has been complicit in the creation and persistence of school segregation. If you know anything about the Brown decision, it is that racial segregation in public schools was outlawed. So how could school segregation persist in New Jersey? And you may even be wondering, how can school segregation persist in a northern state at that? Because all that racism stuff was a problem of the South, right? No, racism and racial segregation in public schools has been alive and well in New Jersey since the enactment of the public school system in the 1844 state constitution. So according to the complaint, the state is liable for school segregation because it has adopted and implemented laws, policies, and practices that require, with very limited exceptions, students to attend public schools in the municipalities where they live. This complaint was filed collectively by Latino Action Network, NAACP New Jersey State Conference, Latino Coalition, Urban League of Essex County, the United Methodist Church of Greater New Jersey, as well as 9 school-aged children and 2 school districts. Attorneys for these plaintiffs presented statistical data and submitted expert testimony to demonstrate the prevalence of de facto segregation in our state. They asked the judge to find this reality as a violation of the state constitution and coinciding non-exclusionary statutes, in addition to violating the Charter School Program Act and the New Jersey Civil Rights Act. What was at stake, the attorneys argued, was how the dynamics of segregation produced a two-way system of racial stereotyping, stigma, fear, and hostility that obscures individuality and denies all concerned the recognized benefits of diversity in education. In other words, school segregation is not a problem for Black and Brown folks. It's a problem for everyone. It's a problem for our nation's education ecosystem. It's a problem for the future of our society. Nearly 5.5 years later, on October 6th, a decision was rendered. In our time together today, several distinguished and involved panelists will help us unpack the decision and consider possible next steps. So to introduce our panelists, we have Van Deen.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Van Deen Campbell, and I am an assistant research professor at the Joseph C. Cornwall Center for Metropolitan Studies and associate director. I have the honor of introducing our 5 panelists today who have generously offered their time to help us think through the recent decision. First, we have Elise Boddy. Professor Boddy is the James V. Campbell Professor of Law at the University of Michigan Law School. Her scholarship explores the regulation and production of race in spatial contexts and dynamic systems that perpetuate racial inequality. She teaches constitutional law, state and local government law, and civil rights. Professor Boddy's work bridges diverse disciplines and practices of scholarship, teaching, community, and service, and is widely cited and discussed in both academic and non-academic circles. Before joining the Michigan Law faculty, she was a professor at Rutgers University. While at Rutgers, she founded and directed the Inclusion Project, which engaged communities, students, faith leaders, educators, and researchers in a multi-sector initiative to build equitable education systems in New Jersey public schools. Body was elected to the American Law Institute in 2017 and as an American Bar Foundation in 2019. In 2021, President Biden appointed her to the Presidential Commission on the Supreme Court of the United States. Before joining the Rutgers faculty, Body was the Director of Litigation for the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund and supervised its nationwide litigation program. Mr. Lazaro Cardenas, Esquire, is a managing partner at Patel and Cardenas LLC, headquartered in Freeholdboro, New Jersey. He also serves as the firm's policy director. In his legal career, Lazaro assists clients in various legal matters from foreclosure defense to probate and real estate matters. He serves on the boards of directors of some of the leading Latino advocacy organizations in New Jersey, including the Latino Coalition of New Jersey, where he serves as deputy director, and the Latino Action Network, where he is a member of the steering committee. Since 2016, he has worked with the Latino Action Network Foundation, where he is currently their chief compliance and legal officer. As a Latino activist and an active member of Hispanics Inspiring Students Performance and Achievement, he is a regular speaker at schools throughout New Jersey, discussing the importance of education and issues that impact Latinos and minorities. He is the founding chair of the Latino Festival of Monmouth County, established in 2005. Our third panelist is Mr. Christian Estevez. Mr. Estevez is President Emeritus of the Latino Action Network Foundation and is a community leader at the state and local levels. Mr. Estevez began his career in labor movements when he was hired by the New Jersey State AFL-CIO in 2001 and later Communications Worker of America, Local 1037. Working his way up to Executive Vice President. He has worked as the New Jersey Legislative and Political Director for CAA District 1 since 2021. He has also helped to found the Latino Action Network, a statewide social justice organization in 2009, and served as its president from 2016 to 2022. Mr. Estevez continues to participate in the Latino Action Network as President Emeritus and Chair of the Land Education Committee. He was an adjunct professor at Rutgers University, where he taught a course on Latino workers in the United States. Our fourth panelist is Ms. Vivian Cox Frazier. Ms. Frazier is President and CEO of the Urban League of Essex County. Since becoming its president and CEO in 2004, Ms. Cox Frazier has led the organization's growth and transition from a social service agency to a comprehensive community development corporation. She had a distinguished corporate career in organizations such as Prudential, Credit Suisse, and Cigna before joining the Urban League. Ms. Frazier has successfully guided the League's organizational progression, establishing the Financial Opportunity Center, a job-creating social enterprise, affording a job-creating social enterprise. She has also led affordable housing developments and strategic community organizing. These programs play a vital role in its mission to promote economic empowerment as a key driver for social change. Recognizing that quality education paves the way to economic opportunity, Ms. Frazier ensures that it is integrated into every program and service area at the Urban League. Our fifth panelist Mr. Robert Bob Kim, Esquire, is the Executive Director of the Education Law Center. He oversees and directs ELC programs and activities. He has been engaged in civil and education law and policy for his entire career of over 25 years. Prior to joining ELC, Mr. Kim worked as staff counsel at the American Civil Liberties Union of Northern California, senior policy analyst at the National Education Association, and senior counsel and deputy assistant secretary for strategic operations and outreach in the Office of Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education during the Obama administration. In 2020, he reviewed education and civil rights issues for the Biden-Harris presidential transition team. A leading expert and author in educational law and policy, Mr. Kim has written extensively on a wide range of legal and policy issues impacting public education, including a regular columnist in Phi Delta Kappan. And I would add that a thread through all of our panelists' bios is just a deep connection to the issues, whether through personal experience or just a commitment in their professional lives. And so we are excited to hear their views today. As we transition to the panel, it is organized so that each panelist, beginning with Professor Boddy, will provide remarks for 5 to 7 minutes, followed by which we will transition into questions and responses from both moderators and our audience today. Professor Boddy.
Thank you, Vandine, and thanks to Cornwall for organizing this event, and to Leah Owens for her opening remarks. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak and to be present among this wonderful group of committed educational researchers and advocates. I've been asked to say a word about the decision, the 93-page decision, which I will do in just a moment. I want to just say that aspects of the decision are highly technical. So the technical question before the court was essentially whether the plaintiff's claims could be resolved on what's called a motion for summary judgment, meaning that there's no disputed question of law or fact. And the defendant similarly moved for summary judgment. Neither party won everything that it wanted. The plaintiff's motion for a partial summary judgment was denied. We had alleged, and I'll include, even though I'm not technically a plaintiff, I'll include myself in the we, but we had alleged that the entire educational system across the state, across all of the districts, across all of the regions, were unconstitutionally segregated because of race or ethnicity. The court held that the plaintiffs had not proved that claim. And here I should also be clear that this does not mean that that the plaintiffs can't come back and assert additional facts that would tend to prove that the entire state was segregated, just that the appropriate showing was not made in this particular round. The court at the same time said that the fact that the plaintiffs did not establish that the entire educational system was unconstitutionally segregated does not diminish that the plaintiffs have demonstrated marked and persistent racial imbalance in numerous school districts across the state, that defendants' actions, policies, programs, and inaction have failed to remedy. So the court here is acknowledging that there is racial imbalance in school districts across the state, not the entire state, but that there is imbalance in parts of the state, and that the defendants have failed to remedy that imbalance. Defendants had moved for summary judgment as well. Their motion was similarly denied because the plaintiffs did show, as I mentioned just a moment ago, that 6% of schools are racially isolated. That is, where a single race or ethnicity makes up 90% or more of a student body. That's about 85,000 students by my calculation. The other point I'll mention is that the court acknowledged that neither municipal nor school boundaries are impermeable, I'm quoting from the decision, are impermeable in the fight against segregation. That is, we have school districts that are drawn based on municipal boundaries. Those boundaries are not, those boundaries can be breached in order to aid the cause of school desegregation or integration, however you might, whatever term you might prefer. There is, I should also mention that there is a long history of law challenging segregation across the state in individual districts, and some districts where there is actually, and in some cases, I should say, where there is more than one district that was involved in school desegregation. So this law is not completely novel. Again, there is a history of cases that acknowledges that school segregation is unconstitutional under the New Jersey state constitution. I should also add that the specific constitutional provision in the New Jersey Constitution was the handiwork of a single Black legislator who in 1947 managed to push through this particular state constitutional provision, and his name was Oliver Randolph. And as there have been decisions around school segregation in other districts, as I've mentioned before, that includes North Haledon, Montclair, Inglewood. So there is a longstanding recognition that school segregation violates the state constitution. Again, this, just to emphasize once again, this particular case is novel because of the breadth of the state constitutional claim. So I'm going to stop there and happy to answer any questions further into the discussion. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Professor Boddy. Mr. Cardenas?
Hi, everyone. This is Lázaro Cárdenas, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Latino Coalition of New Jersey. So, one of the things that I want to bring up 3 points here. The first is these decisions take forever, as we saw, just to get a result on a motion for summary judgment. We embark in a 5-year journey. So, it is important that we get this right. And even the prior decisions, have not gotten it right and have not achieved, I guess, the ultimate goal of desegregating the schools. We're the number 6 or at least top 10 state that is segregated. I'll share you a quick anecdote here that about 6 months before this decision was filed, we had a meeting with Justice Stein, who has been involved with this from the beginning, but also a key figure he was in the court, in the Supreme Court, when Abbott decisions came down. And I asked him, and I said, Justice, why? I see this as undoing your legacy. Why are you engaging in this? And his answer, I think, is telling, and I think can inform how we proceed here. He said, Lázaro, because we didn't go far enough. We didn't get it right, and I want to fix that. And I think that even if we take the current decisions, what the court said in that decision, those selected towns in selected counties, I think the one thing the court doesn't take into account when they do that is twofold. The first is that they don't take into account that people move around, and that because of affordability, there's a lot of Latinos. I do a lot of closings in the South now. So counties in the South that were excluded here were not mentioned. And 10, 15 years from now, we may be looking at another segregation in counties that were not included or towns that were not included. So any solution, any remedy that we find should not be exclusive to an area or some towns. It should be a statewide, or at least there should be a trigger where if segregation starts to rear its ugly head somewhere else, that trigger, it's set, or the second piece that I found interesting, and I have to give that a little bit more thought, is the court only mentions segregated districts that are high in Latino and Blacks. And as the first person who spoke mentioned, this is a problem for every race, not just Latino and Black. So if the district was 99 or 95 or 92% white, that's not mentioned as segregation. So in order to integrate, I think we need to look at that as well. And that's actually all I have right now. But yeah, I'll be happy to entertain any questions as well.
Thank you, Mr. Cardenas. Mr. Estevez?
Thank you. I'm glad that the attorneys got to go first, because I'm not an attorney and I'm not qualified to speak on the the legal details on this, but I can speak on why, for me, this case is so important. And a big reason here is that, for me, is where I come from. I was born in Plainfield, New Jersey in 1974. And in 1974, Plainfield was a place that was a victim of white flight. So I grew up in a community where I saw a sea of boarded up houses. I didn't know this until much later in life, but when I studied this issue, the reason why so many people had left Plainfield and other places was in part due to a favorable decision on education desegregation in Booker versus the Board of Education of Plainfield, the town where I was born, where the court found that segregation within the boundaries of a municipality were unconstitutional. And it seems that once people within the city of Plainfield and in other places found themselves, being told that they had to, if they were white, they had to put their children in school with Black and Latino students. Instead of doing that, they chose to move out of town, abandon their homes. For some reason, even though they abandoned homes and let them go to foreclosure, they were able to still get new mortgages to build houses or buy houses in the suburbs. And they slammed the door behind them through redlining, and made it impossible for Black and Latino families to also move there. So I grew up in a very segregated Plainfield, where most of the people who were left, most of the families that were left were families like mine, who were working poor Black and Latino families. And there was by the time I was in school, by the 80s, the school books still said that Richard Nixon was still president, because the books were outdated and the buildings were crumbling. And for me, that was a challenging environment to go to school in. I was struggling. Again, at the time, I didn't know why. I thought it was me. my mom was a single mother raising 4 kids on her own, and when I got to middle school age and started to get into more and more trouble, she was running out of things to do to help me within the city in which we lived. And but my brothers, who by that time were adults and able to work, um, agreed to help her and help us by moving back in with my mother, so that together they can put together uh, their uh, their resources and rent an apartment in Westfield, which is a affluent white town a few towns over. And this is something that immediately started to have an impact on me. The school that I went to all of a sudden had a lot of time and resources to put towards me. I wasn't in the classroom with as many kids like me who were struggling. When I was in Plainfield, 100% of the kids in my class were from poor families that were struggling. And when I got to Westfield, I was one of probably the only person or one of the very few who were in a similar situation. And it wasn't that my teachers in Plainfield were bad teachers. And in fact, they were actually great teachers. They worked really hard, but they had to deal with a classroom full of students who were in crisis like me. And I liken this to if you were like a captain of a boat and you had 30 passengers, and all of a sudden all 30 passengers fall out of the boat at the same time and into the water, and you only have one life preserver. And this is what it was like. It had to be like for our teachers, and continue to be like for teachers in these schools and communities where there is high concentrations of poverty. So for me, I was able to get a lot of interventions that helped me, thrive. By the time I graduated high school and I got accepted to college, I wondered, why I thrived when a lot of my Latino and Black friends from Plainfield did not. And I set out to try to study this and learn this and see what I can do about it. And, what I learned was that it wasn't that I was special. It wasn't that I was exceptional. It was that I had an opportunity that they did not. And that other people like me who had an opportunity to go to a school, whether it be some, elite private school or able to move into one of these communities, our, students like us who had these opportunities had much greater, better outcomes than students who stayed behind in the schools that were characterized by high levels of concentrated poverty. So, for me, trying to address this became part of my life's work. And even though I'm a labor organizer by trade, I still spend a lot of my time trying to deal with this issue, and I'm very fortunate to be able to work with such great partners like those who are on this panel to address this. And when we started the Latino Action Network in 2009, we tried to address the issues of segregation that we saw to be one of the most important underlying problems by joining in on the lawsuit, the Mount Laurel suit. And when we had victory, I believe it was in 2015, I was very excited. I was looking forward to seeing communities get desegregated, and in hoping that would lead to widespread improvements in educational outcomes. And when I asked our partners in the housing advocacy community how long it would take for integration to happen through housing integration, I was told that even if they put shovels in the ground today everywhere, it'd probably take 20 years or more before we saw any significant change. And so for me, it was important that we dealt with the education issue right away, because we couldn't wait on the affordable housing process and lose more and more generations of kids we had to do something. So I was honored to be included, as part of the team, part of the coalition that helped bring this lawsuit. I believe in what we're doing here. I think that what we got during the Abbott versus Burke cases, where the Education Law Center was successful in getting the state to provide equal funding, was an important step because it helped bring some parity in funding to a certain extent, and update buildings, update school books, and all that. But but that was, in a sense, the equivalent of the Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, because we continue to have segregation, which continue to have negative outcomes. And so for me, the Latino Action Network versus the state of New Jersey case, the reason we brought this is because we need more than Plessy. We need to finally see the fulfillment of the promise of Brown versus Board of Ed, where all kids have an opportunity to learn side by side, where it impacts positively on Black and Latino students and all students of color, but it also helps white students grow up studying next to students who are different than them and better reflect the population they're going to be living and working with in their adult lives. And if we can have these kids grow up together, learn together, then we hope that will create a better world where there is much more equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Estevez. Ms. Fraser.
Okay. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I think I can echo, Christian and other members of the panel, of the motivation of why we do this. Certainly, the Urban League was founded by a multiracial coalition of people who believe that advancement and opportunity, should be provided to everyone, and it shouldn't be limited based on your race. So even from the founding of the Urban League, that's been our core work. And my own personal experience has been that I was bused as a child, as a 12-year-old, to a predominantly white school. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I tell you, I was a valedictorian of my little elementary school class, so I knew I was smart. My whole community, my teachers, my family, everybody told me I was smart. So when I was bused and I went to the new school, I signed up for all the honors classes because I knew that's where I was supposed to be. But on the first day of class, I experienced that the other kids in the classroom, white kids, knew the answers to questions and had information that I had never seen before. And that first day of junior high, I left feeling demoralized, really feeling like I was less than. And so I really believe that, a lot of times when you have, it's unfortunate, but as a minority in this country, you have to say there's certain realities. So I would say one, equal funding is good. It's not enough, right? And I also think that having equal funding does not necessarily guarantee equal opportunity. And the exposure and majority populations tend to get the resources they need for their kids. And poor children tend to be less than or getting less than. So I just, when I was approached about the suit, we didn't hesitate to participate because we feel it's important as part of the league's mission and work. And also, we don't want children to have that feeling like they're in environments in a global society that they're less than. So you're going to live in a world, or you're not going to live in a segregated world. You want opportunities to advance with your careers and your families and economically. And that means we have to be, embrace that diversity. And so that's why I was, eager when the suit was presented, didn't hesitate, because we see the damage that segregation does in communities already. And while you say, like, do you have to be around white children in order to get a good education? No, okay, so I'd say, and I think Dr. Payne and I might have talked even like historically before schools got integrated, predominantly Black schools, a lot of families felt that when the schools got integrated, their children's education deteriorated. It didn't get better from integration. But I think times are different now. And also, I think the resources tend to really follow the majority. And we have to have everyone invested in making sure that all children, and particularly Black and Brown children, have access to, a great education. And that needs to start in the state in elementary school, because even with the affirmative action decision, you have young people leaving high schools not prepared to go to college. And that's terrifying too. Or they'll go to college, they'll incur a lot of debt, and then they don't finish. So they've already, behind the eight ball before they even get started. So I really believe the best way to ensure, equitable education is not through separate but equal, but really through, diversity and inclusion of all students and ensuring that all students have that access. So thank you. And I'm really, I was disappointed, as others have said, about the length of time with this suit. The decision was less than perfect. I just felt like, well, he could have told us that a lot sooner than than they did tell us. But I also know that, the trail of civil rights, and it's rocky and it's long. And I'll say the Urban League's been around for over 100 years, and we're in this fight. And I really appreciate the support of all the attorneys who are working on this, other organizations that are also plaintiffs in the suit, to stand firm and continue to push, because it's clear that other communities are watching and the nation is watching. And it's important that we hold the state of New Jersey accountable to its Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fraser. Mr. Kim?
Thanks, Vandine, and thanks, everybody. It's so nice to be with you. I just thought I would spend my time making a few broad observations about the decision itself, and then hopefully turn the conversation a little bit toward potential remedies or outcomes of the case, so that we could, begin a conversation around that. I want to make most of my observations about the case to be positive in nature, because I think that there were some positive aspects to the case that, are worth underscoring. So I thought I would start there, especially in light of the fact that, Leah started us out on this panel with the observation that we're nearly 70 years after Brown versus Board of Education. And this case is really a powerful reminder that racial segregation is still with us in schools. This issue has never gone away. It's still with us. And this case serves as a powerful reminder of that. I think the positive aspects that I see of this ruling, number one, that the judge allows the case to move forward. He didn't rule in our favor in our legal claims, but he made a lot of powerful denunciations of the state also, and underscored the fact that they do have a legal obligation to address segregation that we alleged with sufficient specificity, that the state had intentionally failed to exercise their constitutional obligations and authorities to remedy segregation. So it wasn't by any means a slam dunk, or he didn't, the court didn't lay down the hammer on behalf of plaintiffs, but he allows the case to move forward, and I think that was important and positive. A second thing that I thought was valuable about the case was the court underscored that segregated schools constitute as much of a denial of a quality education as much as the denial of equitable funding and resources. It's not all about funding. Funding is, obviously I work at the Education Law Center, so we know that funding and resources, equitable, adequate, are essential for quality education. But the Latino Action Network case really poses the question and underscores this and highlights this need, in the words of Rucker Johnson, that we need a synergy of policies to create equal opportunity in schools. It's not purely about funding, it's also about race, and it's about racial equity and diversity. And so we do have a long way to go still. And I think the case highlights that. A third aspect of the case that's very powerful to me is that the court in many parts during the opinion highlighted and, really kind of, I thought, was taking the state to task about it. It has the ability and power to address segregation in schools. And now there's nothing that's sacrosanct in the policies and the ways that schools are divided and populated and so forth, that cannot be overcome if the state really has the commitment and develops policies and a determination to sort of solve and address this problem. And so I think in many places the court was saying, hey, state, you really can do something about this. You don't actually, technically even have to wait for an outcome in this particular litigation. And then the fourth thing, really, I just want to say overall, the value of the case for me was that to have a state court, any court, to be back in conversation with the public and other sectors of government on racial isolation in public education is positive. The notion, can we as a society effectively address de facto segregation, not legally mandated segregation as in the old days, but segregation that's still prevalent due to historical and current factors. This is the first statewide desegregation case in recent memory. And so it's very important, even though we didn't get a total victory here, that a court is re-entering the conversation nationally. And I think that that's really significant. And then just finally, just the things that I think we should start to talk about in terms of possible remedies or outcomes in this case. It's really important that a wide cross-sector of stakeholders in and outside of education weigh in and provide input and feedback on what could be possible remedies in this case. And it's really incumbent on all of us on this Zoom to share those ideas, to reach people that aren't on this call, to get people from all the corners of the state to kind of weigh in, because the remedies ultimately in this case will be largely voluntary in nature. It's just critical to get buy-in and support from multiple diverse sources. And I'll just make three general observations about the remedies for me that are really important as we talk about them. One, as Lazaro and others were mentioning, it really should involve in key ways the whole state. This is not just about majority urban or majority Black and brown districts. It's really involves and should involve a larger cross section of states and districts, including those that are predominantly white. I think we also need to talk about not only specific and discrete programs that could help diversify schools, but we should talk about structural and long-term changes that the state should make in terms of the way it engages on this issue and the way it engages the public, that really would transcend any one particular program or policy to address this issue. And finally, I think that the remedies, just to throw out there, that we're not just talking about moving bodies, we're not just talking about inter-district remedies here in terms of segregation. We're also talking about within district and within school reforms, because wherever students go, wherever they end up, those schools have to be supportive and equitable and respectful and support, really provide the conditions so that all students can be supported and thrive wherever they are. So we need inter-district remedies and regional remedies, but we also need within school reforms to make sure that all students are taken care of and feel good about where they are. And so with that, I will stop.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. We have several questions in the Q&A and on the chat. But before Leah jumps into those, I had one clarifying question about the fact that the decision highlights highlights that the issue of segregation is limited to a few cities. Are we missing something in the technicalities around that? I know part of the initial argument was that it was a statewide issue. And so I feel like there might be some legal technicalities in there that we should be thinking about.
Before the lawyers answer it, the legal side of it, I will answer it from the layman side, right? I think that as much as any district that is, and I like the term that Mr. Kim used in terms of racially isolated, right? Any district that is racially isolated with Black and brown is segregated, but any district that is racially isolated as almost all white or completely white is also racially isolated. So in my book, when you look at the state, and I think the vast majority of districts throughout the state are majority or almost completely white, those are just as segregated as the 27 or so districts that Judge Lugie cited. Again, that's my layman's read of it, but I'll see what the lawyers say.
I'll just jump in. So that the judge did say, as I indicated before, that the plaintiffs had not proved the statewide claim. This, and again, this was a superior court decision, so it's the trial level decision. Doesn't mean there's going to be a trial, but that it's at the lowest level in the court system, and so that's not necessarily the last word on that. There's still some discussion about what next steps are, but so I guess don't assume that we can't revisit that part of the decision. I just want to say a couple of other, while I have now stolen the floor, I just want to add a couple of other quick points in response to some of the, maybe one or two of the questions that I saw in the chat. The first is, I just want to make clear, so the complaint does allege that white students are also segregated. So even though the judge only mentions Black and Latino students, and a lot of the focus has been on Black and Latino students, it's very clear that white students are racially segregated. So just want to put that on the table. The other thing is, and if folks are interested, I can try to post the complaint in the chat if I can figure out how to do that. When the complaint discusses the harms of segregation, there's a very broad interpretation, excuse me, of the harms. And one of the things that the complaint focuses on is that it's not just about reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's also about how children learn to engage with one another and learn to come to value and respect relationships across differences of race and ethnicity, as well as class. And I think it's important to put that into the mix, because it sort of helps put a little bit of, expands our understanding of why segregation is important. Yes, there are harms to education, the reading, writing, and arithmetic, but it's socially harmful because of the ways that it breeds distrust and fear of difference. The other thing I just want to mention really quickly is in terms of remedy. I personally feel, and I know others on this call believe as well, that remedy should be part of a public discussion, right? That this is not something that the lawyers should just sort of cook up on their own. Like there has to be a really robust conversation about what the remedy looks like, and I really feel like that is so key in this process. And then the last thing I said, I had made the last point, but then I lied. Someone asked about the charter school program, or how charter schools factor into the decision, and the court did say that the plaintiffs had not met their burden in proving that the Charter School Program Act had been violated. Again, that's not necessarily the last word, but that was what the court held.
All right, so that's actually a great segue, because I had a little bit more to expand on in terms of charter schools. So along with the Q&A here live, some folks actually also submitted some questions when they registered. And so thank you, Elise, and to the entire panel for your opening remarks, and in particular, Elise, for starting to answer that question about the impact of charter school organizations. So that's what Molly wanted to know about. How have charter school organizations joining the state as a defendant had an impact on the case, and how might it in the future? And also one of the questions that was submitted beforehand was, how are charter schools racist for high academic performance outcome? So I guess if we could clarify what happened in terms of the New Jersey Charter School Association and a couple of other charter schools signing on as defendants, and just clarify that for us. And what was it that the attorneys had to say about the role of charter schools in school segregation in New Jersey? And then I'll also just throw in there, if anyone wants to address the inter-district public school choice program that we have here in New Jersey, since most folks equate charter schools with school choice, but we actually have this program, this law on the books. And so how does that play a role? Why don't we see more districts taking advantage of the inter-district public school, or families taking advantage of that act? And as for any or all folks, feel free to respond to questions that you feel.
So I guess I can say a little bit about the role of charter schools. I think, my understanding is that the charter schools wanted to have some freedom in terms of where they are located. And there was, I guess, I can't say for sure why they came in on the side of the state, other than that they didn't necessarily want to be compelled to participate in, or to be required to diversify their the students who are enrolled in charter schools. Fortunately, I can't give a better explanation than that. That's just sort of what I assume by virtue of their participation in the case. And Leah, I'm sorry, I think you had asked another question that.
Just the role of the inter-district public school choice programs, as most folks, when they think of charter schools, they equate it with that term school choice. And since that is something on the books, kind of how come that hasn't played a larger role in school desegregation in New Jersey?
So it's obviously correct that there is an inter-district choice program. That's actually one of the remedies that has been flagged by the plaintiffs as a possible vehicle for school desegregation, although for the reasons that you're noting, Leah, I'm not sure how effective it would be, frankly. In my experience on this issue, working on school desegregation cases and just knowing a little bit about what other school systems have done around the country, I think one of the most successful remedies has been what we describe as controlled choice and magnet school programs. So or building magnet schools. So if you build a magnet school, you locate it in a way that's accessible for all students. You create programs that are attractive, that's themed programs like aeronautics, science, technology, and engineering and math, and language programs and history programs and the like. That it's a way to attract students and their families to participate in school desegregation. We've seen that in Hartford, Connecticut, as an outgrowth of the Sheff versus O'Neill case. So in some inter-district choice, it's possible, but it hasn't been widely used to date.
And if I could follow up on that, part of the reason it hasn't been widely used, and this is aside from even if it were widely used, whether it's the most effective measure, but it's one of the examples we gave of possible ingredients of a remedy, right? But part of the reason why it hasn't been more widely used is because the state started this as a pilot program and has severely restricted it since its beginning, right? And so even the school districts that participate, that are willing to, that have open seats and want to bring students in, I've spoken to several people from that part of that group of schools, and they've supported our lawsuit and want to see, and they've been really lobbying for the expansion of that program because there's a need. They have shrinking populations, they have seats in their school districts, and they see how this could be beneficial to everyone. That program was not designed with desegregation as its focus, but I think most people who support the program see that as a possible tool or in the toolkit or an ingredient in the remedy. In terms of the charter schools, I've had this conversation with the head of the Charter School Association, where we talked about our positions, and I asked them why they would come in against desegregation, why would they would continue to support segregation, and they said that they didn't like that we pointed out that the role that charter schools have played. And I made it clear, at least from my personal opinion, that at the very least, charter schools have not done anything to remedy segregation because they almost exclusively exist within the boundaries of where the segregated schools are. They basically mirror the population of those places. So through their design, they don't address the issue. So whether they're part of the root cause of segregation, that's a different discussion. But do they help to solve the problem? They do not. And they acknowledge that there are barriers to that, right? Because under their charters they have to be based within you have to take students from where they're located and where they're opening these places up. If they're opening it up in a district that's 99% white, the student body is going to be 99% white or more. All right. And the same thing if it's Black and Latino. That's stats.
I'll just underscore that one thing you said, Christian, which is that if interdistrict choice is not designed for desegregation, then there's a possibility that it could not only not help, but it could be making things worse in some cases. We really need the input from schools, school districts, from parents and community members, stakeholders in particular regions of New Jersey to understand how interdistrict choice could be working for a positive, more positive outcomes in this area. It's really different and very nuanced, as I'm beginning to understand more and more, depending on which regions or town clusters you're dealing with in this state. The dynamics are really unique in particular areas of the state. So we really need to think about what remedies would really work in terms of expanding or reforming interdistrict choice, as well as like independent programs that sort of go beyond interdistrict choice, whether that's charter reforms, magnets, vocational schools, regional compacts, and other types of reforms or remedies as well.
Well, I would say for interdistrict choice, I'm in Essex County, and they have interdistrict choice, and none of the suburban districts have chosen to use interdistrict choice. So I'm not sure how, and as you say, different regions of the state are different, but I'm going to say right here in Essex County, that does not work.
So I think that, to that both, I think that as we're crafting, remedies here, as we're talking about remedies, I think that what the interdistrict public school choice program shows us is that you can move students, between districts. The law allows that through that program. Now that program as currently designed is both limited in scope, and as well as it doesn't address that, and it doesn't address racial balance or socioeconomic balance. So we have an opportunity to say, take the good, change the bad, right? And make it work for this purpose. And then, and then make sure that we're watching it to make sure that it's not abused in a negative way.
This program is a perfect example of how we started this conversation, right? That any remedy, this is a choice, the districts have a choice to join. Any remedy has to be a statewide, because if it isn't, then this is actually an example of how a partial solution for the state wouldn't work, or a regionalized solution wouldn't work, because people either will opt out or not have the choice to go. Maybe transportation could be an issue under this program too. So there are many issues, that a new remedy should address those. This is actually, I think, a negative, point here, if I look at it that way.
Yeah, thank you for those responses. And I think on that point, I know there were some questions about legislative remedies, if you will, in the chat. And so the responses we just heard seem to be pointing for the idea that there needs to be a multifaceted approach to this particular issue. But with that being said, trying to insert my own thoughts in there. So we have a question from Marcella, where she refers to the Robinson v. Cahill case of 1973. And I believe she's quoting some of the information that regardless of the constitutionality, the system was at best antiquated and unresponsive to the individuality of local school districts and their needs. And she asks, what is the system at best now? And so I'd also put in there, right, think about the Abbott legacy, that series of decisions. So we've had a long history, it was referred to earlier, of court cases in New Jersey in particular around equal educational opportunity, right? So whether it focused on finance, whether this is focusing on school segregation, resources, curriculum, whatever the case may be. We've had several cases. And maybe the attorneys might not like this question, but since we have not reached, quote unquote, right, equal educational opportunities, to what extent does the legal system allow us to get to these solutions? Or does it, as I started to insert myself, implicate that we need to take a multifaceted approach?
I'll jump in. So I even though I'm a lawyer, I actually think that the law is more limited than people maybe than lawyers sometimes appreciate. I've said before to some of the folks who are on this are in this program that the community response, community input is really critical to the effectiveness of any remedy. And that doesn't mean that even if folks participate in the crafting of a remedy, that it will attract widespread support and attention, but it is critical that there is support from the communities that are most affected. So Black and Brown communities in particular, as well as, as white students, but Black and Brown communities in particular, just sort of given the imbalance of equity that's historically existed in Black and Brown communities. So law is an anchor, right? Law can help push in a particular direction, but it can't push on its own. It requires, a ground game, I think. So I'll stop there.
I'll just quickly highlight what I think is a related question from the Q&A that was answered, but I wanted to point it out here. The question was, does this ruling allow us to leverage potential bills that can become remedies later on while we are waiting for this to work through the courts? To which Mr. Kim answered yes. So I just wanted to raise that for further discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just Gore, that like, I think that, you know, these are separate paths. Obviously, they can be related in some way and speak to each other, you know, whether you go through courts or whether you go through legislation, but nothing stops the legislature from acting now. And it ought to. You know, we are the one of the top 5 most segregated school systems in the country, nearly 70 years after Brown. And the legislature has the power to act now, to do things. There are bills pending now or from last session that addressed segregation in some ways that have not progressed. And so I think that both legislative ideas, that even if they haven't progressed, they can inform remedies, you know, for sure, because the state can agree to do certain things, and that comes out of legislation, that's great. But if it comes out of a court remedy and settlement or whatever might happen down the road, that's also great. And so I think that it's good to have ideas and concrete ideas and reforms percolating through the different systems of government.
For 20 years or at least 20 years, I spent thinking about this and about this issue. And I would ask people, like, why don't we go to the legislature and try to get them to fix this? I was always told that the legislature does not have the will, right, the moral will to do this, and that would be very difficult. And honestly, when I brought it up to legislators, you know, they wanted to change the subject. I think that, you know, the fact that there is legislation even introduced to talk about this, even though it's not going anywhere, but the fact that it got introduced at all is, I think, due 100% to the fact that we filed this lawsuit, right? If we had not filed this lawsuit, the conversation around education, around how do we fix the problem, was much different before we filed this lawsuit. You know, everybody agreed, and this was a common comment that Governor Christie made during his 8 years in office. He would often talk about that it wasn't fair that children, that children were stuck in inadequate education or in failing schools because of their zip codes. So there was an acknowledgement, even by the most conservative of governors in this state, that there was segregation in the schools. Now, the remedies that he proposed were starkly different. He was proposing the privatization of education, the dismantling of the democratic, accessible, accountable to the public school system, right? And so, this is we have changed the subject here, right? Taking the basis that people on both sides of the aisle, right, agreed on the fact that segregation existed. And we had real disagreements about what the remedies are. And we were told by those people that you had to dismantle public education, you had to privatize it because the politicians would never vote in the legislature to desegregate on their own. So we had no choice but to go to court.
Can I just add?
Judges,
No, sorry.
no, just to say, judges have tenure, politicians don't.
I'll just add, I agree wholeheartedly with with Chris's analysis. I will say, and I'm perhaps most familiar with the federal system, that any time that you wanted to move a major initiative that involved significant social change, it required all 3 branches of government working together. In the federal context, Congress, the president, and the courts. And I would say that it applies here too, that ideally we would have all 3 branches of government working together. And I think there should continue to be pressure on all 3 branches of government to engage. Sometimes I think this is a first mover problem. So if they see that things are moving in the courts, the legislature might actually, become a little braver in their analysis and might be more willing to engage. So again, I think this is where community pressure, public pressure matters a lot.
Yeah, one example of that is, a few years ago, we filed a lawsuit around school facilities, inadequate school facilities with the court system here. And The New Jersey Supreme Court ended up dismissing our case earlier this year, but in the meantime, the legislature put $2 billion into public school facilities for FY 22 and 23. So, you know, it's like it kind of does things sometimes. So that's positive.
Switching gears just a bit, there was a question here in the chat about the role of research and data that would be ideal sort of at this moment and looking into the near future. What kinds of research would inform the processes to come? And actually, I'll just add to that question, how at what points would research even be considered given where we are now?
I want to actually go in, I don't know, Bob, you may have been ready just to make this point, but I think the question of what happens inside the building, inside the classrooms is crucial. And so how do we create equitable classroom environments? What does that look like? What does that mean in terms of teaching? What does that mean in terms of start times and transportation? Like that's one critical aspect of this issue that the case itself does not address. That's not part of the litigation. So yeah, research along those lines, I think is essential.
Yeah, I'll just add that I also believe that research and evaluation are important for the state to step up its support for these activities, because we need quantitative research on, you know, the extent of segregation in our schools. We need qualitative information around what schools and communities are experiencing around racially isolated schools. And we need to start measuring the effects of programs. If we pilot programs, we need to measure what those effects are and how they create a positive impact, not only just on the segregation itself, but on student outcomes, on perceptions and attitudes, and in later outcomes, you know, for students. So this, you know, New Jersey is a potentially a great pilot, if you will, or for DSEG, and you know, all of this to get future money, to get future buy-in, future will, you need to adequately measure progress and build a case through research and evidence for the effectiveness and efficacy of DSEG on students and families. So we need to know about these things. We also put in a proposal with the AIR a few months ago around measuring housing, residential segregation, and how that relates to education segregation, and sort of understanding the cross-sector impacts here are really critical, especially in a state like New Jersey, which is so segregated by residential and by town. Having nothing to, you know, apart from education itself. So all of these things, I think, are needed to, you know, we need to stand up, sort of studying the problem and studying perceptions and attitudes too, because if there's resistance, if there's, you know, pushback, we need to understand why and what and get ideas from research, what would overcome those misgivings, those feelings that this is not a good thing to do in my community or my town. So research is powerful, and I think we really need to lean into that aspect.
I agree that 100% that research is necessary. I also know that in our conversations over the past 5 years with people who, you know, kind of like, I see what you're saying, but they'll say that, but you know, wouldn't it be bad for students of color to have to travel, you know, long distances to go to another school? They seem very concerned for our children. And you know, and they're not looking at research, they're looking at their own, you know, like their own observations or their own thoughts about it. So I offer my own observations, my own thoughts, which are not scientific. And it's my train ride into New York City when I do go into my New York office. And I see all these white kids from like all these like suburban communities wearing their private school uniforms, going from Branchburg all the way to Newark to then take another train to go to Jersey City to St. Peter's prep, right? And or other kids who, you know, to drive over an hour or more to go to Del Barton from my area, right? And so it seems like it's always seems to be okay for kids to travel 2 hours or to get, to be on a train at 6 a.m. to be there by start time when they're going to a prep school, right? An exclusive prep school. But when we want to have our kids have access to educational opportunities, then all of a sudden they're so concerned for the wellness of our kids and how this is going to be destructive to them. So that's my non-scientific. I did not do it. That my study is based on just my four eyes.
So maybe just extending that question because I was looking for Ryan's exact question in chat, but for me it kind of disappeared. So even beyond research, writers, parent organizations, other organizing organizations, like what else can be done? Or if you are aware of other organizations, the entities or individuals who are working behind the scenes or just alongside the legal case that can be discussed. Is there anything else that any of the panels would like to add beyond the idea of research? What else can be done to support what you all are doing as plaintiffs, as attorneys? Or what you might like to see, right, in your imagination? Yes, Nakifa.
Somebody going to answer
Or
that?
no?
I mean, I think it's really critical that we get the feedback and have a place to do that. So I don't know if the our great organizers here of this panel, if we could provide a way for people to plug in and continue to provide feedback on additional ideas, and a way for us to organize continued conversations, as on a statewide level. But that would be really a great outcome from this meeting. But I think all of the ideas here are really on point. What are the policies, both inter-district and intra-district, that would improve outcomes and situations? Maybe we need to look at some within school improvements around teacher diversity, around the need for supportive school counselors, multicultural curriculum. There might need to be anti-bias training. That's not very popular these days in other states, but it may be critical if we are to have supported students of all races and backgrounds in particular schools. Thinking about housing and transportation policies and funding. Transportation is hugely expensive, as we're hearing from districts all around the state. It's a big budget item. How can we consider school funding policy and how DSEG could inform school funding policies? Maybe our statewide funding formula needs to incentivize desegregation and pay for that and some of those efforts. Maybe the state needs to be responsible for stakeholder engagement on this issue. Those ideas have been starting to get floated around. Maybe the state needs to do more around data and record keeping around this, and really have agree to some enforcement requirements where there's some standards for when the state will enforce a DSEG requirement pertaining to particular regions of the state or particular districts. So I think all of these things are things that we need, but it really starts with engagement and feedback from communities. And so that's ultimately, I think, what will inform the success of this effort moving forward.
I'll jump in and just add a couple of additional thoughts. One is that I think we need to make sure that we diversify our teachers, and that the children who are in the school see themselves in the teachers. And also that teachers are instructed in the ways of equity, and that that there's a rigorous, that classrooms are rigorously designed for equity. So there has to be some training. I'd love to get the teachers' colleges involved in some of these conversations, to make sure that again, going back to the issue of what happens inside the classrooms, because that is where this can really, this could fail if the right policies and the right attitudes are not there. So yeah, I think that sort of tracks some of Bob's points.
Thank you. And I believe this was implied, but I wanted to call out a question here about creating space for parents to contribute towards discussions about remedies, from Marcella.
I'll make a comment on this. Yes, I mean, I think the integrating the parents' feedback, not just Black and brown parents, but white parents, is critical. Maybe a series of roundtables or panels that we do an awful job when it comes to talking about race. So the table gets really uncomfortable sometimes, and we got to get comfortable having that conversation, over a sandwich and a beverage, because we're not going to solve this issue unless we get comfortable having that conversation, across every race. And parents are the most important piece of this puzzle, right? Because those are the people that are going to either oppose it or be on board saying, yeah, no, I think this is a good idea for everyone. And I'm talking about parents from every race. There are Black districts that will tell you they don't want to integrate in New Jersey. So this isn't just a black and white issue, no pun intended, but it's there's a lot of shades here of gray that needs to be crossed, and parents are the most important ingredient here, because they will push back hard on this issue.
Yeah, I agree completely with all of that. I believe in having broad conversations with parents and with every constituency who would be affected by the right kind of decision in this case. So I don't think we should fear at all dissent, because I find that if you engage with people and you engage with their ideas and you give them a voice and a stake in the process, that can help, we can get to a better place. So I think that's got to be critical for the discussions moving forward, to engage with parents and students and teachers and principals, the whole litany of people who are participate in the school systems.
And it leads a little bit to a discussion around effective communications around this issue as well. I know communications is kind of like has like a cynical overtone or whatever, and I don't mean it that way. I really do mean, though, that to the extent that we know that the evidence supports good outcomes for students, that we have testimonials about people who have really benefited from their experience, in integrated school settings, that we communicate the benefits, because all parents ultimately want what's best for their child. They want their child to be successful and happy and to thrive and have opportunities that they might not otherwise have. And the more we can lift up that possibility that we want to provide all kids with an opportunity to attend diverse schools that really prepare them for work life, for adult life, for civic life, and so that they can just be amazing, in their futures. I think that's what all parents really want for their kids. And if these reforms can fit into that emotional and, just sort of parental goal, then I think that then we're on the right path.
I just want to extend
Certainly,
the question.
go ahead.
Just to extend the question a bit, and I guess maybe push a little. So we talk about conversations and public dialogue and so forth. What if we imagine one step further? Is there room for sort of public pressure at any point in this process? You know, for any outcome, really. We've talked about the segregation case. We've talked about other bills that were introduced. You know, when we think about different campaigns, you know, on TV, we see how pressure can be exerted. And so I'm just wondering if there's a place in this process where, you know, the public can be better organized to be a little bit more, to push harder around this, or is it not the nature of lawsuits to kind of accommodate that sort of public pressure? And again, just distinguishing between the discourse and the conversations to the next level of that.
I'll jump in on that really quickly. And I think I said this earlier, I believe very strongly that there does have to be a public process behind this. And ideally there would be conversations around the state. Because again, just sort of given the magnitude of what we're discussing, if you don't involve people in the process, they'll oppose you on process, and they'll also oppose you on the merits. And chances are that if we have conversations, we can actually get to a better place, because we'll get ideas, and people will again feel like they're being heard. So I personally think that's essential. And I said that to the legal team over and over again. It can't just be a bunch of lawyers sitting around a table making this up because we don't really, we're not educators in the sense that that would be involved in as this process moves forward. Can I just say one other thing too, just in response to Bob's point about communication? I think I want to sort of distinguish between the term desegregation and integration. I think the problem with desegregation, like technically desegregation refers to the removal of the legal barrier. So, if we're talking about eliminating zip codes as a barrier to school desegregation, that has a much more limited impact, just removing the barrier, than integration, which at least in my understanding involves a much fuller, more robust understanding of what a school system should look like. That deals with teachers, that deals with students, that deals with curriculum, that deals with the full range of policies and practices that characterize school systems. So I try not to use the term desegregation, because I think it's too limited, and it invites tokenism in ways that I think can be harmful. The last point I'll make, I think that this is an ongoing process. I think that it would be bad if if we were to get everything that we envision for this as a collective, and then folks were to walk away. I think that these systems have to be refreshed over time. I've seen that in the federal context. It's not just a one and done. It really does, I guess, Vandine, to your point, if we're talking about parents and other stakeholders, there should be, part of the system should envision how we create opportunities for people to remain engaged. Well, in there.
So I wasn't sure if Vivian, you were.
Oh, yes. I was going to say that I think, part of anything, if you want, I'll tell everybody, I can do social services all day, but if I want social change, you need resources. Okay. So if you look at how the Marriage Equality Act got changed, they have resources, and then you can organize a whole campaign. So I really think we should maybe think about how to do that. And then when you have adequate resources, yeah, you can have a whole campaign that reaches the whole state, be organized in terms of outreach and getting parents engaged around developing the solutions. But the fact is, right now, most organizations are stretched to do their core missions that they're doing. How do you get people engaged? So even in the communities that you're talking about, the most segregated communities, families are already stretched, they're stretched to basic daily living, and you're trying to get them out for, so really I think it's about making sure we spend time, getting the adequate resources to really launch a campaign that can be successful. So when you only put limited resources on something, you can't do this on a shoestring. We can't do this on a shoestring. We've got to have the resources to do it, to really it's almost like when you're tutoring kids, you say, I'm going to have volunteer tutors. Well, that child's education is dependent on that person showing up. So I believe in paying the tutors, right? So I think the same thing is true as we think about how to, get the civic participation and community and, parents and everybody engaged behind the issues. I think we need to think about what are the resources needed to do that, and who can we go, approach to get them.
Yeah, I don't know if there are
Thank
any.
you. Oh, go ahead,
it-
please.
Oh, sorry. I feel like I'm talking too much. Just really quickly, I don't know if there are any funders on this call, but some of the foundations, hopefully they would pitch in.
Absolutely. And I know we're starting to wind down in terms of time, but we do at least want to ask another question from the chat, and then a wrap-up question, and bring it to a close. So there was a question in the chat from Shadora at the top there at this point. So how do we combat segregation with our feet? So what happens if wealthy whites all continue to move to districts without Black and brown students? I'm thinking Warren County, Ocean County, and other vastly segregated counties or spaces. And connected to that question, there was just a comment earlier about recognizing that all parents want the best for their children. But we also, I think, have to be honest in thinking about the fact that some parents, in particular, some white parents, but it's not just contained to white parents, believe what's best for their children is to be segregated, right? To be in a place where there are others like themselves, because that is what's going to give their children the best opportunity. I think we can't deny, right, the foundations of the economical system of this country in terms of capitalism and how that leaks into the social system, where we focus on individualism and meritocracy and so on and so forth. So, right, so if folks can continue to make these choices to move and segregate with their feet and make their choices by their feet, how can we address that?
I think the answer to that is expanding the districts and creating districts that could be across multiple towns or across even counties, depending on the population of those towns. So creating larger districts where you don't need to be rich to walk, to segregate with your feet, that you can walk or take the bus to the next district. So creating equity for those that cannot move with their feet or their dollars, so they can also cross those lines without having to move.
Agreed. And if you think about voting, and I don't say gerrymandering, but voting districts do that. They're not all uniform. They do that to bring about some racial balance. And I think districts may start to look different. Now, the problem in New Jersey is home rule. I don't know how I'm hopeful, but who knows how you counter that, really. But really, as you said, Lazaro, change the construct of the districts, make them larger, and draw them in a way that brings about more racial balance.
Yeah. In politics, we call it packing or cracking, right? You either pack one district with one minority or one majority, or you crack it. In this case, I think we need to crack some of these districts so that we have more options as parents to send our kids wherever we want to send them.
And also, there's a need to demonstrate and show and articulate how diverse settings are beneficial and desirable for students of all backgrounds. And if if you provide school choices and options that meet the needs of parents, whether it's in the program, in the curriculum, in some other opportunities, in a location that might be outside of where they reside, that we all have to make the case of that these options and choices are good for your child, and and let them make that decision. But that goes both ways. It really is also a communication message, and substantively that the schools where, for example, white or Asian American children would go to would also be very beneficial for them, and in many cases even more so than where they are attending currently.
I think I'll add, I think Elise, you brought up in the beginning that I wrote a note here, boundaries can be breached to integrate. So that's kind of, if that's the ultimate solution, right? You create bigger boundaries.
Yeah, the judge there was referring to the municipal boundaries, right? That those can be breached in service of a remedy. So yes, absolutely. I think a lot of this depends on the design of the school too, the school system, just sort of based on experience in other contexts. But folks have already acknowledged that.
Okay, thank you for such a good discussion. I will ask the last question, and then after that, I'm sorry, Charles, do you want to jump in here? You're muted.
You go, then I want to try to answer just some of the questions in the Q&A did not get addressed. And I just at least want to acknowledge that the questions are there, and we'll figure out a way to address them later. But
okay.
you first.
Well, the question is from Sarah Blaine. What are the next steps in the lawsuit? I was thinking we should end with that. So I don't know if you want to jump in here, Charles, and then we can end with that question.
No, I boot that to the lawyers.
I'll just say really quickly that the lawyers on Friday submitted a motion to the court for it's indicating an intent to appeal the decision, and so that's the next legal step. There were certain aspects of the case that are problematic and would benefit from clarification from the appellate court. So that's the immediate next step, is to do that, and then to see how the case progresses.
I'm going to quickly say a couple of things. One, in terms of responding to many comments about the relative salience of law, thought about many conversations I used to have with Bob Moses, the civil rights activist, who said very explicitly, the law is not a tool of change. That's not what it's there for. It's not what it's about. You can manipulate it sometimes. It can give you crawl space, but it can focus attention on issues. But if you want change, demand has to come from the bottom, and it has to be constant. I mean, those conversations came to me several times. Just very quickly, I want to try to get one. I can't get to them all, but Lauren Wells. Lauren Wells is a very important book. You should look it up. By the way, just came on. I wish the hell I could remember the title. Do we need?
There are no deficits here.
Say it again, Leah.
There are no deficits here disrupting anti-Blackness in education.
Thank you so much. The title tells you need to read it. Lauren's question, do we need to know what Black and brown students who are in schools where they are few in number are experiencing? I think that's just a hell of a question. We don't know that, and we're beginning to look at Cornwall at some data that suggests there's reason to worry about students of color in the hoity-toity school districts. The best resource school districts don't always do as good a job with those students as the districts we call high need. I mean, that's a very preliminary, but we need to look into that. Kevin, and hey, it's good to see your name up there. We also think there are real problems with South Jersey in general that we can't describe well yet. We are pretty sure exclusionary discipline is substantially more common for students in South color, and especially students in South Jersey, especially students of color in South Jersey, right? We're also seeing some issues that worry us about achievement levels of students of color in South Jersey. So stay tuned. That's something that we are worried about. As to Kathleen Witcher, Mary Bennett, whom probably half of you know, has worked with this kind of exchange program where students from urban areas visit suburban areas. You know, she's a very critical person. She thinks some of these programs can be structured in ways that are valuable for both groups. So we can talk to that. Anika, I see Bob Kim is typing an answer to your question about can we revise policy law, how schools are funded. But I suspect a part of what he may refer to is that the fact that we fund schools locally in this country opens the door for all kinds of mischief. Where, as far as we're one of the very few countries that do that, right? And it underscores inequality. But the last thing I will say, in terms of next steps, stuff which occurred to me listening here, Kalina Berryman from Our Children, Our Schools, she and I will put our heads together. We've been talking about follow-up in any case, and we will convene some kind of follow-up discussion focus with this group and others that we find on the street, specifically focusing on issues of remedy. So we'll get back and we'll get some feedback from some of you on how that might be structured. Kevin, in response to your other question, we will definitely distribute. We'll find a way to distribute the film from tonight. We'll also have a student take some notes from this. For some of us, you know, the notes are often more accessible and usable than trying to go through the film. In terms of the questions about research, yeah, Cornwall would be happy to talk about the research. Okay, so we have a brown bag series that we start in January, and this year the theme is going to be high impact interventions. That is, what do we know about what makes the greatest difference in schools? And there's a lot we have to learn, but there's also a lot we know. And we'll actually distribute a bibliography. That's always a work in process, but we are working on a fairly extensive bibliography around that subject, and we'll try to get that out actually in the next couple of weeks. If you have any other ideas for follow-up, let us know. Leah, now I'm done. I'm sorry. Please close this out and send us home.
I think that was a great close. All I probably have to add is just thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you to all of the attendees. Your contact information was entered when you registered, and so future conversations, discussions, developments will be shared out. But please feel free to reach out to Kalina Berryman at Our Children, Our Schools, or Charles Payne at the Cornwall Center. Particularly, I think probably around some of these ideas that ended up in the Q&A. Yes, we can do them. So let's get connected and work them out. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It's a great panel.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Charles, for organizing.
Oh, thanks all of you.
Yes, it was a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Absolutely.